Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at some interesting source material all about multi-level association rules in data mining.
That's right. It's a fascinating area.
So our mission really is to get a handle on what these rules are, maybe why we actually need them when we're digging into data, and the different ways people go about finding them.
Trying to pull out those key insights.
Exactly, finding those nuggets.
And what's really interesting, I think, based on these sources, is this idea that valuable patterns aren't just sitting there at one single level of detail. The sources really push mining information at different levels of abstraction, so thinking high level, but also really specific and kind of everything in between.
Right. So not just say, people buying milk also buy bread.
Yeah, the classic example.
But maybe zooming out to see if people buying dairy products also tend to buy baked goods. Or even, like, zooming way in, people who buy organic skim milk maybe often grab gluten-free sourdough too. But hang on a sec, why do we need these multiple levels? Wouldn't just mining everything super detailed capture it all anyway?
That's a really key question, and the sources definitely address it. If you only mine at the lowest, most granular level, well, you often end up with patterns that are just too specific.
Too specific. How so?
Like, they might not happen often enough across the whole data set to be statistically meaningful, or really useful. You might find a rule for, like, one basket, but it's not a real trend.
Okay, so niche, it's almost noise.
Exactly. But then, if you only mine at a really high conceptual level, you risk getting rules that are just obvious.
Like our people who buy groceries buy food example earlier.
Precisely. Common sense stuff. So multi-level mining is really about finding those non-obvious, actionable patterns that live somewhere between those extremes within that whole hierarchy of concepts.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense for the why. Yeah. So if we agree we need multiple levels, how do people actually do it? What are the main strategies the sources talk about?
Well, they lay out three main ways to tackle this: uniform support, reduced support, and something called group-based support. And they really differ in how they decide what counts as an interesting pattern, like what's frequent enough to pay attention to.
Uniform support. That sounds, well, uniform, simple.
It is the simplest concept, yeah. Basically, you pick one minimum support threshold, like a frequency benchmark, and you apply it rigidly across all levels.
All levels, from dairy products right down to organic skim milk.
Exactly. Everything has to meet that same bar relative to the whole data set.
Okay. But I can see a potential problem there. If you set that bar high enough to catch a pattern for something common, like maybe just milk in general, doesn't that mean you might completely miss a pattern for something less common, like, I don't know, artisanal goat cheese, even if it's a really strong pattern among goat cheese buyers?
You've hit the nail on the head. That's the main drawback the sources point out for uniform support. It's consistent, sure, but it tends to miss patterns for less frequent items, even if they're super relevant in their own little niche.
Okay. So I'm guessing that leads us to the next one. Reduced support. Is that designed to fix this?
Exactly right. Reduced support is basically a strategy where you lower the minimum support threshold as you go deeper down into the finer levels of detail.
Okay.
It kind of acknowledges that, more specific items are naturally going to show up less often overall.
So you're adjusting your expectations, essentially. You're saying, okay, for this very specific thing, it doesn't need to appear quite as often to still be considered an interesting pattern.
Precisely. It lets you find those meaningful links that might have a low frequency overall, but are actually quite strong within their specific context. Like finding a link between a specific, maybe less common brand of cat food and a specific brand of litter. Uniform might miss it. Reduced is designed to catch it.
That makes intuitive sense. Okay, what are the third one? Group-based support. That sounds a bit different again.
It is a bit more nuanced, yeah. Instead of just adjusting the threshold based on the level in the hierarchy, group-based support lets you adjust it based on predefined groups or categories of items. These could even be at the same level.
Like maybe you'd have a different threshold for your gourmet imported cheeses group versus your everyday sliced cheddar group, even though they're both technically cheese.
Yes, exactly that kind of thing.
Right.
The sources suggest this recognizes that different groups just naturally have different sales volumes, different frequencies.
Right.
Applying the same rigid rule to, say, fancy cheese and block cheddar would mean you'd probably never find interesting patterns within the fancy cheese group because it sells so much less overall. Group-based lets you tailor the requirement to the group itself.
Wow. Okay. That really highlights how Just changing the definition of what counts as important or frequent can totally change the insights you pull out, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. These aren't just arbitrary choices, they're tools to help find what's genuinely relevant, depending on the data and what you're actually trying to achieve. Choosing the right approach is, well, pretty crucial.
So, wrapping up this deep dive then, we've seen why looking across different levels is so important, avoids missing patterns that are too rare down low or too obvious up high. And we've got these 3 core ways of doing it. Uniform support, simple, consistent, but might miss the rare stuff. Reduced support lowers the bar for more specific items, and group-based support tailors the bar to specific item categories.
Yeah, that covers the main strategies, and it leaves us with a bit of a provocative thought maybe. Just thinking about how fundamentally adjusting those requirements, those support thresholds, how that inevitably shapes the kinds of insights we get from any data.
And I suppose the flip side is, what crucial information, what patterns might we be totally blind to just because we're stuck looking at our data through only one lens or only one level or with one fixed rule?
Exactly. Something to definitely think about next time you're confronted with patterns in data.